Herzlich willkommen zu 99:1. Welcome to 99:1. This is an English episode. The topic is the next big war that's on the agenda now, Israel's war against Iran. And to that purpose, we are going to have a couple of probably English-speaking interviews in the coming days. And the first one, we start with Séamus Malekafzali. He's a repeated guest. Welcome back, Séamus.
Good to be back.
Yeah, thanks that you are here in quite dire times. A couple of words to Séamus, anybody who hasn't seen our episode with him about Yemen. That was actually a couple of years ago. Séamus is a journalist. He writes about the Middle East and the Global South as a whole. He has a Substack. You should definitely check that out. There he brings news and analyses from the Middle East to the reader. Mostly in English language. We'll put a link in the description here, so be sure to check that out, as well as his X channel that always also delivers quite interesting insights into intricacies of the Middle East and also Iran. So let's get right to that war now. Séamus, Iran was attacked by Israel last week. Israel started that war. Why would Israel start that war now? What are its objectives? And what are their achievements until now?
I mean, Israel has wanted this war for, almost as long as I've been alive. It's been a very, very long time, ever since the start of the Iranian nuclear program, in a very major step. But the reason it's gone for this now is because, they've made all these preparations since the outbreak of the war against Gaza on October 7th. Apparently, they made these initial plans in November 2024, which makes you think they were preparing to do this if Biden was reelected or Kamala was elected, Trump was elected. It didn't matter. And now, because Gaza has reached this kind of murderous stalemate, now they're in between the first war against Lebanon and now potentially an outbreak of a second war. Taking out Iran, making it weak, making it degraded will... The idea, I think, is to make any future wars much easier. Easier in the sense that they would be able to murder without fearing Iranian retaliation or further Iranian support to Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis in Yemen. It's a long time coming, but it's happening now for a reason.
So basically, like a little bit similar, of course, on a quite different scale than their actions right after the Assad regime fell. They went over there and they destroyed basically all capabilities of Syria to defend themselves against Israel's air might. So what they're basically trying to do now is degrade Iran as an actor that could challenge their hegemony in the region in any kind of way. That's what you're saying their goal would be, yeah?
Yes, IDF officials, Israeli journalists who are completely drinking the Kool-Aid would tell you that it is impossible for Israel to completely destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities, for instance. These things are very deep underground, these enrichment facilities, deep underground into mountains. Even bunker busters that the United States might have would have a hard time doing that. But they can degrade it, they can set research back, and I think more importantly here, they impose a severe cost on Iran repairing these capabilities, trying to engage in another war, and really attempting to do anything for Gaza or for Lebanon or for any of the organizations that are fighting therein. These missile barrages that have been happening against Israel, hundreds, now it's down to 40, now it's down to 20, now it's down to 10 last night. Even if they're deploying new weapons, like the hypersonic missile they just debuted last night, it's still evidence of the fact that these missile supplies are finite. And once they run out, reconstructing them when Israel has been able to really break the wall of protection around Iran, it's an extraordinarily difficult thing. It's why Hezbollah is having as much difficulty as it is right now in Lebanon, trying to rebuild.
What's their end game in all of this? They basically are currently involved in like 3, 4, 5, 6 fronts.
Some fronts, I think they said that.
Yeah. So what do you think they want out of this? Because at some point, one really has to ask, like, do they see Do they see an end to this? Do they have an end game? Is there a point where they say, okay, we have achieved our goals, and now let's bring calm again?
I mean, with Iran specifically, there was a statement about the fact that apparently their target bank in Iran is going to run out in about a week. I have a feeling that that's a ruse. My impression of what the Israeli sell to Trump is that, okay, they're going to hit all these different symbolic points of the Ayatollah, as Israel Katz has been saying, the defense minister. They're going to take out a lot of the ballistic missile capabilities. They're going to bomb as much as they can of Iran's nuclear facilities. But if the U.S. delivers a bunker buster to Fordo, the primary nuclear enrichment facility, that'll end the war. Or if they, better yet, if they kill Khamenei, as has been suggested, that will also end the war. But the impression that I get is that, of course, if that happens, and especially if something like Khamenei is attacked, then the war will expand to American bases in the Middle East, and then the war can continue indefinitely. And the war continuing indefinitely, I think, is the point here. Netanyahu made those messages about, oh, well, I want to be lighting the torch for the Iranian people to take back their freedom, saying women, life, freedom, and voting those protest slogans. But actual regime change where there is a pro-Israel leader in charge, while that might be preferable to the Israeli government, to the United States, I think Netanyahu likely knows that that's impossible. So keeping the Iranian government fighting off rebel groups, Mossad agents, protests, while they're being assaulted by Israel and chaos reigns, that is, I think, the ideal that he is going for.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the reason, like the source of the animosity, maybe between Israel, US on the one side, and Iran. Because people that don't really know much about that topic, they will ask themselves, yeah, okay, like you said, right, there is animosity since decades. In case of the US, it goes back like over 45 years, at least until this hostage-taking situation in Tehran. What is the source of animosity? What's the problem between Israel? What does Israel have a problem? What kind of problem does it have with Iran? And why does Iran see Israel as an enemy?
I mean, with why Iran sees Israel as an enemy, if we can work backwards from that, I mean, so much of this goes back to the Shah, right? The idea was that the Shah was overseeing a dictatorial regime with the full support of the United States. And in addition, even though the Shah was personally anti-Semitic, talk about Jewish bankers and the control that Jews had over the media, he himself was very much in league with Israel, and Iran, having a very devout Muslim population in the 1960s and 70s, was very affected by what was happening in Palestine at the time. And the fact that it was being done with Iranian tax dollars was a major source of animosity. And when they came to power, removing all of that from the table was a major part of that agenda. Even though during the war with Iraq, they would work with Israel, they would get intelligence from Israel, and against a common enemy, it was a marriage of convenience rather than conviction. But of course, since then, they've built up the acts of resistance. There's been a recognition that these marriage of conveniences can't happen again. And they've placed themselves as a regional power that is in total opposition to the power of Israel and the United States trying to expand their influence in the region. So the fact that Iran remains this other regional power, one that can contend with Israel's power in any sort of way, that has to be wiped off completely, because Israel only foresees a region where its influence is supreme, that it is able to control the affairs of every other state in the region, that its military has the only ability to operate, to do anything. I think the best establishment of how, the best way to illustrate how Israel sees things is that one of the more recent attacks against Syria was against Syrian naval ships that were in the port. And the justification that was provided by the IDF was that these ships interfered with freedom of navigation for the Israeli Navy. these ships were in the Syrian port, but they were still nevertheless a threat to freedom of navigation. So any example of military power, not just that Iran is a major regional power, that is a threat to Israel. And because of that, that animosity has to continue until it becomes a non-entity.
So, I mean, ultimately, what they are saying and what they're communicating all the time is basically that what they want is a monopoly of power in a region that is not, at least not formally yet, their region. Normally, we talk about monopoly of power inside of a state, and they basically want that to be projected throughout that Middle East, wherever they think that border would be. It definitely includes Iran too, Syria too, and any kind of hint at even just the potential possibility of challenging that monopoly has to be dealt with. That's basically what they define as security for Israel. That's how I understand it, right?
No, it's unsustainable, but it nevertheless is a requirement of the current Israeli state.
Right.
Continuous expansion, continuous brazen provocations, and the idea is that through projecting those brazen provocations, you can achieve "quote unquote" security, even though those brazen actions create more resistance,
Sure.
more animosity.
Of course.
You degrade it in the short term, but in the future, I mean, I wrote about this the other day, but I mean, Yahya Sinwar, for instance, if we can use that as an example, he was not born in a pre-occupation Palestine. He was born in Gaza in a refugee camp, and the circumstances of the occupation, what he saw after the 1967 war, was what pushed him into
yeah, of course, yeah,
things that he did. It might be a delayed response, but this isn't, again, what I said before, this isn't sustainable, but it nevertheless is their vision.
Right. So you already mentioned it, this axis of resistance. Talk a little bit about that. Like, what was Iran trying to achieve with that? Obviously, that was a thing that, at least in name, was something that was organized by Iran mainly, although Hezbollah also took a big role in this. Nasrallah at least did. Talk a little bit about that, and talk a little bit about what has he achieved with that. So, because ultimately that axis of resistance was also one of the thorns in Israel's eye.
I mean, ideologically, it obviously came about because there needed to be some sort of external protection for the Palestinians and the organizations inside Gaza and the West Bank. But functionally, it also acted as a shield around Iran if there was ever military action taken against the state.
The Ring of Fire or something like that, right? Yeah.
Something like that, yeah. And so the idea, at lest before October 7th, was that if Iran was ever attacked by the United States for any reason, then Hezbollah would activate, all the militias in Iraq would fire on U.S. bases. The idea, if Iran fell, then the entire region would come ablaze. And this is something that Nasrallah also talked about very often, Hezbollah doing this. But after October 7th, when Hamas reoriented the centrality of the axis to Gaza, to what it was ostensibly for, that threw the whole thing into a sort of disarray, because it's the dog that caught the car. Now you are in the situation you've always talked about, where Gaza is now the red line, and the red line has been crossed very quickly. What do you do about it? And because Hezbollah, after the intervention in Syria, after integrating itself in the Lebanese state, it's lost a lot of its ability to act unilaterally. And because of those restrictions, because of its belief in its own deterrent capacity, it was degraded very heavily during the war last year. It isn't intervening now. Hamas is also degraded, even though it continues to fight. Obviously, it's not going to intervene on Iran's behalf on anything. It doesn't have that ability. The Yemenis, the Houthis, are able to do something. They have been coordinating hypersonic missile launches against Israel with the Iranian military, but they can only fire one missile or two missiles at a time. That's not a tremendous addition to that. And the Iraqi militias have threatened that they might fire on U.S. bases, but they haven't done anything in that respect. At least not anything that's verifiable. In short, it was fragile before, and now I think it's it's close to shattering, or the cracks are very obvious. There will be no mass intervention to save Iran at this point from other groups. I don't think so. And building that up again, if Iran is even interested in trying to build that up again, that is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And I don't know if there is an appetite within the Iranian population at this point to, again, reorient around foreign interventions and foreign aid and doing things outside of Iranian borders, even if there is sympathy towards Palestine inside the country.
Right. Understood. So, I mean, yeah, to that extent, that is an achievement also of Israel's warfare. So basically, that was a success for them. Let's talk a little bit about the opposition of the US to Iran. I'd like to entangle this a little bit, because how I see this is that the US animosity towards towards Iran has intersections with Israel's reasons, but is also distinct at the same time, and also the way that they try to solve it is they maybe have different imaginations on how they want to solve it. So maybe you can talk first about the US. What's exactly the US's problem with Iran?
I mean, the U.S. has similar reasons why they have animosity with Iran to Israel, and that it threatens their regional power. But in terms of what you're talking about with different ways that they want to go about it, I mean, previous administrations, I think, truly did want regime change of some sort. I know that Reza Pahlavi at some point had purchase within previous U.S. administrations, the son of the late Shah. There was an impression that the U.S. could also have supported protest movements inside Iran, that it should have taken advantage of native protest movements like the Green Movement in 2009. It oscillated between a more hostile attitude during the Bush administration and then reconciliation, but the fundamental goal still remained, whereas Israel's goal was always full-throated animosity and a desire for total war. Right now, though, the U.S. is so in lockstep with Israel that I don't think their wants for what's to happen are at all distinct. I think they both want chaos. They both aren't really interested in regime change being successful. I think they just want it to be a kind of a mess, like is what is happening in Lebanon and what is happening.
A failed, broken up state, like in Syria or something. Yeah,
failed, broken up state. I think when we talked about wars in the past, like Iraq, the motivations were always discussed as about, we'll have a very pro-American state in there, but also we can take advantage with oil contracts. There'll be great opportunities for American businesses in that country. But the Republican Party that has emerged in the last 10 years is obviously not interested in state building. That's why they regard it as a failure in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. So the idea has returned to this kind of colonial approach, old school. Trump was literally talking about in his first term, we should have gone into Syria and we should have taken the oil, right? No need for contracts, no need to speak about American free market capitalism. No, we should have taken it as reward for us. And so regime change in which there's a pro-American ruler in Iran is not really on the table at the moment, but punishing Iran, forcefully destroying its government and then taking its resources in some future endeavor. I think that's the main goal.
Okay. So basically, what still then becomes a question mark, or what we still have to explain, is the whole kerfuffle of the last, let's say, 2 months about these alleged negotiations. I mean, not alleged, they were actually negotiations going on, right? And we had like these weird situations also in which the negotiation standpoint of the US changed, where in the beginning Witkoff was still saying that a minimal enrichment for civilian purposes would be fine. A couple of days later, maybe even just a day later, he switched his post and went for zero enrichment. which was a non-starter for Iran in the very first place. So there are people around that say that it was just a ruse. It was a charade to keep Iran busy while preparations for the attack would start. At the same time, Trump seems, it's kind of silly to say that, but Trump kind of seems honest at the same time, trying to say, let's get back to the table, let's negotiate, which means for him basically surrender, because ultimately zero enrichment would be a surrender of Iran's aspiration as an independent and nuclear powered nation. So how do you disentangle that? How does this fit together? Because ultimately, why did they try to do this negotiation game? Why didn't they just go in, just like they did now?
I think the Trump administration, I think a positive, like a very illustrative example was seen during the negotiations with North Korea, right? During his first term. There was a big show about him going to meet with Kim Jong-un multiple different times. They shook hands. It was heralded as a massive diplomatic breakthrough and a showcase of how willing Trump was to break from his predecessors and try to do something positive. And then ultimately it completely fell apart and became nothing because North Korea was only willing to do denuclearization if America agreed to leave South Korea, and Trump had no interest in doing that. And so nothing happened. Nothing emerged from that, and there were no real negotiations in that respect. So the word that somebody else has used, the phrase somebody else used was he likes the theater of diplomacy. And here, because Trump likes deals, because Trump likes the idea of seeking, quote unquote, a diplomatic solution before anything, he's not a pro-war president after all. Going back to the negotiating table with Iran, but coming in with a firm want, a firm aim, I think was the only intention. The idea that he was seeking this and then his hand would be forced inevitably. And I mean, with Witkoff, the leader of these negotiations, this open deceit was something that we saw with Gaza earlier this year. The sell that was made to Hamas was that if you negotiate with the United States unilaterally, you don't have to deal with Israel and their deceitful negotiators. You can directly speak with us. And if you release Idan Alexander, we will lift the blockade. That was the personal
promise.
Yeah, Witkoff made.
Right.
To Hamas. And then Alexander leaves. He goes back to New Jersey, and the blockade is not lifted because they got everything they wanted. They lied, and there was no repercussions for the United States. And so I think the idea was that, okay, if that worked in Gaza, then of course that can work on a much larger scale here. We can abandon our aims to ask for the dismantlement of Iran's missile program. We can show that we're willing to bend on that, but nuclear enrichment, we're not going to bend on. And then what you're saying with him agreeing to eventually allow nuclear enrichment, even within that, there was deceit because they would still have to stop it at some point. They would have to move the nuclear enrichment above ground, which now Israel is attempting to bomb and destroy all of it.
And get rid of all their rocket arsenal and stuff like that, right? There was much more to the demands of the U.S. than just the enrichment question, right?
It was the original aim, which then they abandoned, but now they're going back to it.
Back to it, okay, yeah.
Yeah, but also they wanted an end to nuclear research, period. That Iran couldn't do any nuclear research, and there was no sanctions relief at all. What you were saying before, it's a surrender deal, and Iran can't accept that. So now now they can portray it as, well, they wouldn't accede to our very generous demands, so now we're going to take all of this by force. It was never honest to begin with. So when discussion comes up from European powers like Chancellor Merz talking about how Iran needs to come back to the negotiating table,
it's ridiculous, yeah, of course. Yeah.
What would they negotiate?
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to say because that leaves Iran in a very difficult position as a country. But
negotiate your surrender, basically a Versailles Treaty style surrender. You just
exactly
you have to sign here with your blood, and then we'll take you. So.
mean, what the diplomats are saying to Axios just the other day was that essentially, if they don't come back to the negotiating table, then they won't have a country.
Right.
It's a deal of surrender. It's a deal to give up your sovereignty to Israel and the United States and be like the other countries that we have annihilated.
Now, here's the thing: like this idea of them using that as a ruse, or maybe even to have something like plausible deniability. Yeah, look, we've tried to negotiate with them, but they didn't want. It's just that at this time, after 2 years of this calamity going on in Gaza, and the like unconditional support of the US and the West for everything that's going on there, it's just hard to believe that they give a damn about plausible deniability in this way, right? So it feels much more like if they wanted to go in, they would just do it. They don't give a damn. So that's why I'm thinking maybe this guy Trump, maybe he really believed that he can, by threatening them and by building up over months, building up this huge arsenal in the area around Iran, and talking tough language to them, that he can threaten them into surrender. Maybe he really was that delusional, and that's why he tried it.
I think that's exactly what he thought. I think it's difficult to get a full picture of how he thinks just because he changes.
Yeah, of course.
What he says all the time. But the impression that I got from people in the national security meeting last night was that he was very confused as to why Iran was not able to give him responses in a timely manner, considering the war that's happening. He really, I think, did think that, okay, Israel will do all this massive bombing that they promised me will be very effective. Maybe we'll make this one huge threat later on at some point. But Iran will come to its senses. They'll surrender because they see what we've been able to do to them.
Yeah, it's nearly like as if Trump is going to save Iran from the destiny that Israel has basically set out for them, right? He's going to save Iran from destruction by telling Iran to surrender. So that's basically, I think, how it seems like this is how they approached it.
Yeah. Exactly. In the post that Trump makes on Truth Social, it's all about how
he was a nice guy. He gave them a chance. He gave them so many chances.
I gave you a chance. Hey, your hardliners who were being you're being too hard in these negotiations, they're all dead. So it doesn't matter now. You can come back. And how would this sound to the Iranians? Obviously a bit insult, but Trump doesn't care. He assumes it's part of the negotiation. It's not. There's only one outcome of this, really, and it's the expansion of the war. But Trump, I don't think, has really any idea of what that means. He used to, but he doesn't anymore.
Okay, so before we start talking a little bit about outlook, let's first talk about Iran a bit more. First question, everybody's asking that. Did Iran want the bomb, Séamus?
No, I don't think so. Even in the assessments of the CIA, even in its own intelligence assessments, if there was a nuclear program, a weaponized nuclear program that Iran was pursuing, it would have stopped it in the early 2000s. So years and years and years of them not pursuing that, only pursuing a civilian nuclear program. When the JCPOA was achieved in 2015, the nuclear deal with Obama, the reason that was able to be achieved is because American negotiators finally, in a move that still kind of surprises me looking back on it, were serious about this. And Obama provided other nuclear scientists and physicists who could negotiate with Iranian scientists and provided that level of respect that, okay, we want to believe you, prove it to us, then we'll do it. And they agreed to that. Enrichment was limited. They got rid of much of their uranium stockpile.
Israel hated it.
Israel hated it because it removed it really made it difficult to portray to the world that Iran was a global threat that threatened Israel in particular,
right,
and that it needed to be taken out. And so it had to be removed. Trump removed it. Trump got out of the deal in 2018. And even after that, there really has been an indication that they've been going towards a nuclear bomb, even while they're under bombardment right now. The Iranian president has denied to parliament that they are going to pursue a nuclear bomb. IRGC Major General Mohsen Rezai went on state TV and said, we're absolutely not going to go for a nuclear bomb. I mean, before this came out, nuclear scientists would speak about this. Like, Iran has this technology in it, like within it. It has nuclear scientists. It has enrichment capabilities. It could get a weapon if it wanted to. That's undoubtable. It has the resources to do so, but they never received that order because there was a fatwa from Khamenei years and years ago, decades ago, that they would never produce nuclear weapons because of the weapons of mass destruction that Iraq used against Iran during the war. There was trauma from that. There was a moral imperative that they don't go down that path. And now, even as circumstances change, they're not budging on that. The impression that I really do get, and this might be a bit of a strange statement to say, is that the main obstacle to them nuclearizing is the supreme leader.
Yeah, right.
He's not budging on it. The military leadership doesn't want to budge on it. The president doesn't want to budge on it. Even if public opinion has really changed in this regard, there's no indication to me that they are actually going to change the shape of the missiles or enrich to 90%, even though they easily can.
I mean, there is an argument to be made that it makes sense to try to stay away from that when you're under so much pressure from the outside, and especially you being worried for more sanctions that could hit you if you do it. But this all supposes that you are dealing with basically good-willed actors that are not there to decapitate you and destroy your regime, but actually that you must suppose that they want to trade with you, they want to have normal relations with you, and that's just mind-boggling. I don't understand how they cannot realize this, at least now. So maybe one question, to make it more concrete, not so abstract. I could not understand to find out that Israel was able, in the first night when they attacked, the first morning, to basically attack high-ranking generals of the IRGC in their homes. I'm like, they have been threatening you for weeks and months, and you have seen what Trump has been doing with negotiations and stuff like that. You spoke about North Korea, you spoke about Witkoff in Ghazi. They should know that they should be kind of protected. But it seemed like they were being caught with their pants down. So I'm wondering, like, where they at? Like, what are they thinking?
There is a real current within the Iranian establishment, in its politics, in its military, at really all levels, that to some degree the outright animosity towards the United States that was expressed in the early days shouldn't have been as absolute, that there is something to be gained from negotiations with the United States and trusting them, that on some level they are rational actors, even if they are against you. When Khamenei initially authorized nuclear negotiations in the 2010s, he talked about heroic flexibility, about strategic patience, concepts like this. And that has caused the IRGC and the Iranian military to continue to trust the United States routinely, even when they are clearly trying to deceive them. I mean, this is why the retaliation for the assassination of Nasrallah and Hania was delayed for so long, because they didn't want to mess up ceasefire negotiations, which Biden was never going to do in the first place. And with why IRGC officers were caught, like you said, in their apartments all at once, they were taken out, which means their movements could have been easily tracked by Israel. I think it's the same thing that happened to Hezbollah, where they truly believed to the full extent their own deterrence capability, what they had projected out to the world, that they could never be hit in this way. In Hezbollah's case, that meant after the greatest communications breach in their history with the pager attacks, they all decided, some of them coming from the hospital directly, they all decided to meet the military leadership inside of a basement in a building in South Beirut, and then the building was taken out, and the entire military leadership is dead. Here, it's okay, all these countries, as you said, are threatening military action. They're clearly being deceitful. But up until that point, diplomats were confused. They were bewildered by the fact that these proposals were incoherent, and they didn't realize up until maybe a day or two before that the intentions here were entirely deceitful.
So in your assessment, they did realize it now, like they are waking up to that, or
I think they're recognizing it now, after, of course, the war has happened and they're stuck in this position. The foreign minister has said that they're not looking to speak while Iran is under fire,
right?
that America is not trustworthy, and they're not delaying the retaliations against Israel like they were doing last year. They're
Right.
doing it night after night, multiple different waves. Um, they're in that mode now, but they are still in the reactive position where they are letting Israel dictate the scale of escalation. I imagine, same with Hezbollah, I imagine with the expectations that there will eventually be a ceasefire to be negotiated. But again, how do you trust that? How do you try to figure out that they're trustworthy in some way, that you can actually, they can keep to their agreements that eventually they will come
Yeah,
to?
or they'll just continue like in Lebanon, bombing the hell out of whatever they want at any time and in place, and you just have to stick to the ceasefire agreement. But Israel can do whatever it pleases.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I want to go back one step. Just one more question towards the Iranian enrichment, because that was always brought up. I heard that several times, that even though they might not be going for a nuclear weapon, they went for enrichment capability, enrichment levels close to 60% or something like this. I'm not an expert with this stuff, but to levels that are that there are no arguments for that they could be used for civilian use, and the only argument to have them is to be closer to achieving a nuclear weapon if needed, like basically using the idea of a deterrent as a deterrent. Like we don't want to have the nuclear weapon, but you should be deterred because you should know that we could have it fast. And that's also one of the reasons why Israel was pushing for it. So is that true? Like, what's on this story? You know about it?
That's right. That it's the idea of the deterrent more than the actual deterrent. I mean, there are certain civilian uses for uranium enrichment of that kind. There are
Okay.
radiopharmaceuticals, for example, but
Right.
that was always treated in the Iranian media as like, hey, this isn't just something that we're doing; we can also get something out of it. But when the JCPOA was torn up, the Iranian government adopted this slow building of nuclear enrichment, publicly announcing it each time, and the intention was that, okay, we can get closer to a nuclear weapon. But if you fear this enrichment, as you have always said, Israel and the United States, if you want this to go back down, which we are completely willing to do so, you need to come back to negotiations. We will freely do this, but as long as that's the case, we'll get up there, we'll get the benefits from that enrichment, and also just know, unspoken way, maybe we could get up there if we wanted to, even though we publicly said we're not going to do so. I don't think it was an especially successful strategy in retrospect, considering that the negotiations turned out to be completely complete lie. But if they decide to change their doctrine at some point in the future, being at 60% is a much easier deal to enrich to 90% for weapons grade than it would be for 3.57%, which is how it was under the deal.
Right. Okay. Talk a little bit. I mean, you have direct links even to you know a lot about Iran and what people and especially the government there also are thinking about. So you already hinted also a little bit on this. Where are they at now? What are the discussions that are going on there? Are there internal fractions that are have different opposing views, maybe how to deal with that threat coming from Israel? What's their mind space now, basically?
I'm unsure if there is any internal fracturing happening at the moment. What has been presented outward is a pretty united front across all levers of power, military and political. There aren't going to be any negotiations for the moment, though. obviously that could change. Israel needs to have a very violent retaliation dealt out to it, and that retaliation should increase, and that it should be on this war footing, and that it needs to be committed to that war footing. In terms of internal fractures within the society, which I think is a point of focus for American media and for the governments of those countries, there hasn't really seemed to me to be any verifiable pro-Israel current that's being activated in the country. There are Mossad agents that are being arrested pretty continuously, but to the extent that there are protests against the government, that there are attempts to instigate some sort of pro-Western uprising, I haven't seen it. To the extent that has been expressed, there have been cell phone videos that have been published online where somebody says, "I hope Israel wins," while they're being bombarded by Israel, or another person saying that the Islamic Republic brought this war on us. I mean, even if there are lots of people who think that, okay, the Islamic Republic's foreign policy may have led to the situation, or I don't want civilians to be killed on either side of this, which is an opinion that is expressed online pretty frequently. The idea that would lead to this Netanyahu-friendly uprising that he so publicly seeks, that has not happened, and I don't think that is going to happen, because, I mean, one, Iran has a history of betrayal and treachery of this sort, from the MEK teaming up with Saddam during the war with Iraq, and also just, even if that wasn't the case in the past, just optics-wise, there's a country that has declared war on you, that is bombarding you relentlessly, demolishing your cities, and now you are going out into the streets to advocate that those people win. In any country, this would not be feasible in any respect.
Yeah, also historically it has never worked, even though they try it again and again. But yeah, that's not how that goes. Okay, last question for Iran, and then we get to the outlook and shortly to the end. Can you estimate in any way what the impact of Iran's counterattacks to Israel are? Like how maybe even Israel is keeping a lot secret, so it's difficult to estimate what they think about it. But is there some measure of, okay, we are creating some kind of deterrence again, or not yet? Or maybe they know that they can't, and they're fine with it, and are just trying to be a nuisance for Israel as long as they can?
I think they're trying to reconstruct deterrence, though I don't think that's going to happen. In terms of damage, I mean, we've seen the scenes of the suburbs of Tel Aviv, the buildings that are hit there, and the pretty substantial destruction that has been done to homes in that area wherever Iranian missiles strike. In terms of disrupting Israel's military infrastructure or political infrastructure in the same way that it has been able to do with the Iranian military, I'm less certain. They struck the Ministry of Defense, the Hakiria, in Tel Aviv directly multiple different times, which they were not able to do in previous.
Supposedly a Mossad building yesterday in Herzliya also, yeah, right.
Yes, and talking about the censorship that you're talking about, they appear to have hit that directly. There was a massive smoke cloud, but the only reason that we were able to know about it was because there was video taken in the area where somebody said plainly that was a Mossad building. Otherwise, the Israeli media was very not privy to that.
Yeah.
But to the extent that, there's a definite asymmetry there that Iran is not going to be able to do. They don't have those precision missiles that Israel has. They don't have fighter jets flying over Israeli territory like the Israelis are able to do over Iran. So they have to hope that these long-range ballistic missiles can hit what they are aiming to hit. The cruise missiles, the hypersonic missiles, they can do what they can, but all they can really hope to do firmly is deplete Israel's very expensive air defense capabilities, which, to my understanding, they are able to do. The Wall Street Journal has reported about that.
Wall Street Journal has reported about it yesterday, yes.
Yeah, they're
They're
running
getting
low.
short.
But even then, while there may be that bottleneck, the United States can still come back and they can supply those funds. Whereas Iran will eventually run out of ballistic missiles in a way that can be at all effective. And there's no chance that they can get those kind of resources from a different country. They would have to repair a domestic manufacturing base under fire in places that are being attacked, and all their supply lines are being watched. So it's a who blinks first kind of thing.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about outlook, as far as one can outlook. Actually, will the U.S. join the war? What do you think? And what I mean, when they do, what could be the consequences?
I think they will. I think Trump occasionally remembers that he doesn't want a war with Iran. It's the reason why, after he assassinated Soleimani, he didn't continue the war when Iran retaliated with that operation on Al Assad Air Base in Iraq. But Israel is making that, is expressing that want to him, I think, very regularly. And the people in the administration are not unfriendly to the idea. The only person I can think of who would be unfriendly would be Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. But Trump then
He
said
doesn't care.
he doesn't care, so
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
He's really being molded into this idea that America can deliver a killing blow without understanding that Iran will have to respond to that killing blow, or else it will accept its surrender. I think if Iran hits American bases, and I think it'll try to do it in a dramatic way if it does respond, America will enter the war. It'll engage in a pretty significant wave of bombing. To me, the idea will be that it'll be modeled on Yemen, on what happened with Yemen. A tremendous assault on civilian areas, on places that are portrayed as military sites and are obviously not military sites. And then at the end of it, nothing will come of it but a degraded state with many dead civilians. I don't think that they'll invade the country, at least not yet. A war with Iran has always been historically unpopular, and it remains historically unpopular. There was a poll yesterday where every single demographic polled, literally every single demographic polled in the United States, was against it in a majority, even Republicans who support Donald Trump. So there would have to be more. I say this going off of the previous wars that America has fought. There would have to be more to manufacture that consent, but also there was majority support for the ceasefire in Gaza, and Biden didn't feel the need to do anything. And I'm sure there is a thinking that, well, America can do this, and the American public can go pound sand about it because Trump doesn't have to be reelected. We can just do this. So I'm hesitant on being optimistic about anything. It's a balance between how much is Trump willing to invest in something and how much is he willing to simply let the killing go on unabated.
Right. Like, I mean, that ultimately leads to the question, as they are not the ones in charge, is there, like, do you see any way out of this for Iran? Is there something that it could do, that it could signal, maybe escalate faster? What could they do in order to, get out of this dead end in which they found themselves in?
This is something that I think about a lot, and I don't know if I'm closer to any real answer. I mean, the example I try to think about is Yemen's case, where they were successfully able to bring America to a close of the war that it was waging on the country. And that was through a very strong negotiating position, where Yemen did not budge on its demands and made its intents very clear from the beginning. Two, that it had a lot of resilience in its military that made it very difficult to for either Israel or the United States to achieve aerial superiority or take out any of its military leadership, much of its military leadership. I mean, Israel had been able to take out Iran's entire top military brass in one go, but Israel only just now made an assassination attempt against the chief of staff of the Houthis military, and even then they were unsuccessful. So there's a big difference in the intelligence penetration of the two countries. And third, the Yemeni population, at least in the area that it controls, was willing to suffer a lot for the purposes of defending the Palestinians.
Yeah, they were extraordinarily aligned with this, with that purpose. Yeah, they also showed. I mean, that's the country by far with the greatest show of support in terms of protests and demonstrations and stuff like that. Millions and millions on the street. Yeah,
every single week, millions of people.
Right.
There is sympathy amongst the Iranian population for Palestinians, but there is also a pretty vocal minority of people who do not like Palestinians at all and believe that they've stolen all of Iran's money. But even then, even with that sympathy, it's a similar thing in Lebanon. Like, they're not willing to sacrifice everything that they have for the Palestinians.
Right.
Like, a Yemeni will say, as I've seen one of them say, use our skulls to make bombs to fire at Israel. Shove me into a hypersonic missile and fire it at Tel Aviv so that I can take revenge for the children of Gaza. No one is saying this in Iran. They're not doing that, even if they want retaliation or an atomic bomb. They're not going to that personal of a level where they're willing to give everything that they have for this war, at least not now. So they're in a very difficult position. And my fear is that the outcome of this will be something similar to what Hezbollah has suffered in Lebanon, where there is this quote unquote ceasefire, but Israel now has the ability to strike within Iran whenever it wants, kill IRGC officials, prevent the reconstruction of certain areas. And it'll just be in this holding pattern where Iran can say that it has preserved its sovereignty, but everybody really knows that the situation is much worse than it was beforehand.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we are already at the 1 hour mark, but maybe one last question, because that kind of, I found that interesting. Yesterday, I wrote news about China apparently sending daily cargo flights to Iran. At least it seemed like, because the flight mapper showed that basically when it arrived at the Iranian border, it kind of disappeared, and that happened like 3 or 4 times in the last 3-4 days. And also Russia got pretty vocal. I read news today about Russia warning the US to not engage in the war on Iran. So is there anything you expect from these powers that normally, I mean, in the last years have aligned more and more with Iran and have, strategic treaties and stuff like that? Is there anything to expect from them in order to help Iran in this situation?
I expect that they'll help in the sense that they will provide the aid that you're talking about, but in the sense that they would be willing to do something that changes the course of the war. I'm uncertain. I think Russia may export its weapons back to Iran, just like Iran exported its weapons to Russia during this war. China might do something similar, but these are not countries who are willing to jeopardize their place in the world to help Iran. I mean, China was willing to do something quite, I think, extraordinary, in that when the case against Israel was up at the ICJ, they sent a lawyer to make the case that Israel was committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. They did a whole thing. But that did not stop China from doing arms sales with Israel. It didn't stop its relationship with Israel. They sent a representative just a few weeks ago to meet with Israel and talk about all the investments that they were making. It didn't change it significantly, even if they say these things rhetorically and they make those kinds of investments. So I don't think it'll be anything truly significant. I think there's probably a better chance that Russia might do something, but even then, I don't think it'll be anything truly substantial, at least not at the moment.
Okay, Séamus, thanks a lot for your time. It's morning over there. I hope you managed to have halfway nice day after this. So thanks again, and let's stay in touch because probably we're going to have to talk about this more in the coming days and weeks.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Bye, Séamus, and bye everyone. Thanks for listening and see you soon.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.